Ma'am, we've had multiple noise complaints tonight.
That's not possible. We were just watching a movie. There's no reason for you to be here.
I'm telling you what the neighbors reported. I need you to cooperate.
Cooperate? You're on my porch in the middle of the night.
Don't argue with me. Step back right now. You're being uncooperative.
You do not have permission to enter.
Back up.
I'm telling you.
Move.
Hey!
7:32 p.m. The doorbell rang. In the villa of Judge Rebecca Lawson, the sound was not a pebble dropped into a still pond, but a boulder. The ripples it sent out were not of sound, but of the fracturing of order. She was immersed in an appellate brief concerning the abuse of the Fourth Amendment, her pen hovering over the word curtilage, the sacred boundary the law draws around private life, an invisible fortress extending from the porch to the garden. She was contemplating the extent to which that boundary could withstand the prying eyes of the state, whether through drones, high-powered telescopes, or the abused pretext of reasonable suspicion. She never imagined that the most brutal violation of that boundary would come not from high-tech surveillance or an insidious new law, but from two people in uniform, armed with the most primitive of prejudices. This house was her fortress, her sanctuary. Every book, every piece of art, was an extension of her intellectual and aesthetic world. Her husband was in Chicago at an architectural conference on urban sustainability. Her children were chasing their own dreams in their own cities. Tonight, it was just her and Bach's cello suites, the music's mathematical precision mirroring the rigorous logic of the law, weaving a harmonious order out of a chaotic world. The doorbell was the first discordant note. A string snapped on the cello of her piece. She removed her reading glasses and walked to the door. The peephole, that most ancient watchtower in the fortification of home, presented a stark tableau. Two police officers. The older one, Sergeant David Kane, was in his 40s, built like a linebacker. Time had frosted his temples with silver, but had done nothing to soften the scrutiny in his eyes. The clipboard in his hand was a crude scepter, granting him the authority to question. The younger officer, Lisa Rodriguez, wore her hair in a tight bun. Her eyes darted about with the nervous excitement of a junior predator, eager to prove herself, to assimilate into this male-dominated world of unspoken rules. The moment they stepped onto her porch, Kane's internal monologue had already begun. He'd noticed this house weeks ago while patrolling the wealthy enclave. It wasn't its grandeur that caught his eye, but what it represented, a dislocation. In the worldview he'd constructed from experience, prejudice, and generational resentment, a house like this belonged to a Vanderbilt or a Rockefeller, or at the very least, a successful white man he could comprehend. But for weeks, he'd seen a black woman coming and going, alone. The visual dissonance fermented in his gut into a nameless rage. It wasn't simple racism. It was a deeper, more profound terror at the inversion of the world's natural order. He saw himself as a guardian of that order, and Rebecca Lawson's very existence was a form of cosmic disorder. Tonight, he wasn't here to answer a noise complaint. He was here to correct an error in the universe. Rebecca slid the brass security chain into place. That thin, final covenant of a civil society. She opened the door a crack. "Good evening. May I help you?" Her voice was calm, articulate, tinged with the interrogative precision of a judge. It was neither submissive nor defiant. Sergeant Kane recited his identity by rote, claiming they'd received multiple complaints from neighbors about noise. The lie was flimsy. Rebecca knew this community intimately. Its relationships were built on a foundation of unspoken, mutual respect. Noise. The Bach was playing in her soundproof study at a volume barely audible to her alone. It was a clumsy lie, a crowbar disguised as a complaint. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she stated coolly. "It has been perfectly quiet in my home all evening. If you could tell me which neighbor complained, perhaps I could speak with them directly." Kane's eyes refused to meet hers. Instead, they greedily scanned the sliver of entryway she allowed him. The Jacob Lawrence print on the wall, the sweep of the curved staircase, the warm glow from the distant study. His gaze was not that of an investigator, but of an appraiser, as if calculating the home's value and judging whether its owner matched. He wasn't seeing a home. He was seeing a crime scene, the scene of a black woman having stolen a life that wasn't meant for her. "We can't disclose the complainant's information," he answered curtly, then took a step forward, his physical presence a palpable pressure against the door. "We have the right address, ma'am. We need to come inside and investigate." A cold premonition seized her. This wasn't law enforcement. This was the prelude to an invasion. 15 years on the bench had taught her every nuance of due process. She could recognize the dangerous scent of power untethered from procedure. She made a decision, one that would push this simmering confrontation into a full-blown storm. "Please wait a moment," she said, her tone still measured. "I'd like to call my neighbors to verify. This is very important to me." The reasonable request was the spark that ignited Kane's fury. His patience evaporated. The professional mask shattered, revealing the raw hostility beneath. "That won't be necessary," he barked, his voice tearing through the quiet night. "We're coming in now. Do you have a warrant?" Rebecca's voice was not loud, but each word landed with the weight of a gavel on oak. That question, the ultimate challenge of law to power, demolished Kane's flimsy pretext of legality. His face flushed a deep crimson, not from shame, but from the outrage of being challenged. He, a sergeant accustomed to absolute obedience on the streets, was being held at bay by a door chain and a line of constitutional text. "We don't need a warrant for a noise complaint. If you don't cooperate, you're obstructing an investigation," he roared, jamming his heavy, boot-clad foot into the opening. "Remove your foot. You are trespassing," Rebecca commanded. His response was the violent crack of the door being forced open. The brass chain twisted, groaned, and snapped a final, helpless shriek of metal. Kane and Rodriguez burst in, bringing with them not just their bodies, but the chaotic, feral energy of the street, instantly contaminating her sanctuary. They were oblivious to the silent eyes watching from every corner. Cameras, hidden in the ceiling molding, on bookshelves, and in entryway decor, were already at work, tireless scribes documenting this assault of barbarism on civilization in cold, digital code. "ID," Kane demanded, his tone asserting a mastery he did not possess. "In my own home, for a noise complaint that never happened, you need to see my ID?" Rebecca countered, her composure a mirror reflecting the absurdity of his aggression. "You look suspicious," Kane spat, for words, steeped in poison, that unlocked the core of the entire conflict. He wasn't suspicious of her actions. He was suspicious of her very existence, a black woman living in a house that, in the warped geography of his mind, was not her territory. This mismatch was her original sin. Rebecca didn't argue further. She calmly retrieved her driver's license from her purse. The address printed on it was an exact match for the number on the front of the house, a direct refutation of Kane's entire prejudiced premise. He stared at it for a long moment, the silence thick with his frustration, his defeat, and the impotent rage of a liar exposed. Then he asked the decisive question, one that had nothing to do with noise. "What do you do for a living?" "I am a judge." The air in the room solidified. Time seemed to stretch and thin. Kane's pupils contracted. Rodriguez took an involuntary half-step back, her heel bumping against an entryway table. The expressions on their faces were a study in the instantaneous transformation from predator to prey, shock, disbelief, and a flicker of raw fear. But Kane, a man who had built his identity on a crude and simple hierarchy, refused to accept this reversal of power. In his world, the power of the street belonged to him. The power of the courtroom was distant and abstract. He could not tolerate a black woman holding the dual advantages of wealth, the house, and power, the title over him. It was an affront to his very being. So he did the most foolish, most instinctive thing he could. He denied reality and doubled down. "I don't believe you," he sneered, using contempt as a shield for his panic. "Where's your judicial ID? Let's see it." Meanwhile, Rodriguez began to pace the living room. She wasn't searching for evidence. She was performing a symbolic occupation. Her fingers trailed across the lacquered surface of the piano. She picked up a family photo and set it down. Her actions were a desecration of the home's intimacy. Rebecca had had enough. She walked into her study and returned with her judicial identification and a business card. When the state court seal and the words, "The Honorable Rebecca Lawson, Circuit Court Judge," came into view, Kane's last line of defense crumbled. But he didn't apologize. He didn't retreat. A long career of unchecked power had eroded his capacity for correction. To back down now would be to admit his prejudice was wrong, that his entire worldview was a pathetic joke. He made a ruinous decision. He would compound the error, burying the first mistake under a bigger one. "These could be fake," he announced, his voice strained with false bravado. "You need to come with us to the precinct for identity verification. This is unlawful detention." For the first time, Rebecca's voice carried the full, unyielding authority of the bench. "I am ordering you to leave my home immediately." I am calling the chief of police and my attorney right now. No, you're not going anywhere, Kane said, unsnapping his handcuffs. The metallic click was obscenely loud in the silent room. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice. With Rodriguez's help, the cold steel clamped around Rebecca's wrists. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of being stripped bare. The cuffs bound not just her hands, but her identity, her dignity, and the entire legal order she represented. She remembered her father's words at her law school graduation. My child, remember this. That robe can protect you, but at the end of the day, it's just cloth. In some people's eyes, you will always be black first and a judge second. The cold metal on her skin gave his words a chilling, physical weight. She was marched out of her home into a surreal tableau of flashing phone cameras and the shocked gazes of her neighbors. She saw Mr. Chun across the street shaking his head. Mrs. Henderson next door had her hand over her mouth. Their eyes held not condemnation, but fear. If this could happen to Judge Lawson, what chance did any of them have? Kane's actions hadn't just violated one citizen. They had punched a black hole in the community's trust in public authority. The scene at the police precinct was a dark, surreal comedy of collapsing power structures. The desk sergeant, Michael Torres, a 20-year veteran of the force, went pale when he saw Rebecca. He had testified in her court dozens of times and knew her reputation for being tough but fair. He looked at Kane with an expression of pure, uncomprehending horror, as if staring at a madman who had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the city square. Within 30 minutes, the precinct lobby was more solemn than any courtroom. The chief of police, the mayor, and the district attorney arrived, their faces a mixture of panic, fury, and despair. Chief Williams's apologies felt cheap and hollow against the raw, red marks on Rebecca's wrists. The real bomb dropped when Rebecca revealed she had been quietly investigating misconduct within the department. Kane's name was on her list, and when Chief Williams could find no record of any noise complaint from that night, the truth struck everyone like lightning. This wasn't a mistake. This was a premeditated, racially motivated hunt targeting a sitting judge. The FBI's involvement was a scalpel, slicing through the seemingly healthy skin of the city's police department to reveal the rot and infection festering beneath. On Kane's computer, they found a folder he had mockingly labeled the Community Purification List. It contained detailed files on over 60 successful African Americans, doctors, lawyers, professors, entrepreneurs. Their crime was not criminality, but success. Kane and his small cabal had been systematically harassing, stopping, and falsely accusing them, like a pack of hyenas preying on the city's margins. Their motive was not simple racial hatred, but something more complex and insidious, a pathological fear of social mobility, a twisted sense of themselves as guardians of a natural order. In their eyes, the success of these black professionals had upset a delicate balance. It was unnatural, a theft of resources and status that rightfully belonged to white people. Every traffic stop, every baseless accusation, was a desperate attempt to set the world right again. Recovered text messages from Kane's phone laid their mentality bare. Made that black doctor in the Porsche miss his surgery today. Loved watching him squirm. Gotta remind them who's really in charge here. The trial was a public autopsy of the city itself. The lead prosecutor, Amanda Sterling, a woman known for her surgical precision, turned the proceedings into a masterclass on systemic corruption. Kane's defense attorney tried to paint him as a dedicated, if sometimes overzealous, officer, and pointed the finger at Rebecca, suggesting her arrogance and failure to cooperate had escalated the situation, a classic victim-blaming strategy designed to plant seeds of doubt. But Sterling obliterated that narrative with the video from Rebecca's home. The footage presented an undeniable contrast, Rebecca's calm and restraint versus Kane's escalating aggression and irrationality. When the jury heard Kane utter the words, "I don't believe you, and these could be fake," a gasp went through the courtroom. The testimony of Dr. Franklin brought audible sobs from the gallery. He described in harrowing detail how Kane had pulled him over and detained him on the roadside for 45 minutes, claiming his car matched the description of a vehicle in a robbery, while he was racing to the hospital to perform emergency surgery on a child injured in a car crash. The child, having missed the critical window for treatment, was left permanently disabled. "You didn't just take my time," Dr. Franklin said, his voice trembling as he stared at Kane. "You took that child's future." Facing a long sentence, Rodriguez turned on her partner. In a proffer session with the prosecution, she broke down completely. She described the toxic brotherhood culture in the department, where new officers were hazed and pressured into participating in the veterans' games. These games included baseless stops of minorities, embellishing reports, and making arrests without probable cause. She admitted she had questioned Kane's methods on her first ride along, only to be met with a week of silent treatment and ridicule. She was afraid of losing her job, of being labeled weak or disloyal. Her testimony exposed the most terrifying aspect of systemic evil. It isn't built by a legion of monsters, but by a system that, through pressure, reward, and punishment, methodically transforms ordinary people into silent accomplices, and then into active perpetrators. The verdict was swift and severe: 22 years for Kane, 8 for Rodriguez, with the rest of their conspirators also facing prison time. Justice, it seemed, had arrived like a thunderclap. The media called it a landmark victory, a triumph for the rule of law. After the sentencing, Rebecca stood on the courthouse steps, engulfed by a sea of microphones and supporters. The flashbulbs were a blinding white ocean. She delivered a powerful, measured speech, but her heart was anything but calm. She had won her case, but she had lost something irreplaceable: the pure, unadulterated belief in the safety of her own home and the absolute faith in the legal system she served. Kane and Rodriguez were just tumors, symptoms of a deeper disease. And while removing a tumor is one thing, changing the toxic soil that nourished it, the deep-seated biases in the culture and its institutions, was a far more difficult task. The case did spark reform. New laws were passed, and a new civilian oversight board was created. But Rebecca knew that real change happens in the human heart, and the heart is the one jurisdiction the law can never fully reach. In the year that followed, she received countless anonymous threats. Her house was vandalized with racist graffiti. Supporters of the police union painted her online as a villain who used her status to crush a dedicated public servant. She had won a legal battle, only to find herself mired in a cultural war with no end in sight. Years later, long since retired and now dedicating her life to judicial reform advocacy, she was in her study organizing old papers. It was a quiet evening. The doorbell rang. In an instant, her heart ceased. Her body went rigid. For half a second, she forgot to breathe. Though her rational mind knew it was probably a delivery driver or a neighbor's child, the memory of that night, a dormant PTSD, was instantly reactivated by the chime. The shattered door, the snapped chain, the cold steel of the handcuffs, they had become a wound in her subconscious that would never fully heal. She had defeated 2 corrupt cops. She had shaken a sclerotic system to its core. But she knew she had forever lost one thing: the simple, untroubled peace of hearing her own doorbell ring. She walked to the door, bypassed the peephole, and switched on the video intercom. On the screen, a young man holding a pizza box smiled a bright, sunny smile. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "The fight is far from over." Kane was in prison, but the soil of Kane-ism was still fertile. As long as society harbored the delusion of a natural order based on color, class, or creed, as long as anyone believed they had the right to correct the lives of others, this battle would be fought again and again, in different forms, in different places. Her life's work, from judge to activist, was to ensure that the next time that bell rang for someone else, there would be more people ready to question, more people ready to resist, more people ready to hold the shield of the law firmly in their own hands. Because she knew better than anyone that the sacred boundary of home was never truly guarded by doors and locks. It was guarded by the ceaseless vigilance of its citizens, by an uncompromising refusal to yield, and by an eternal suspicion of the darkness that can fester in the human heart. Justice was not a destination, but a process of perpetual war that demanded new soldiers in every generation.